And over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matt. So today I'm going to give an overview of my PhD and what I've done so far in my 2.5 years of applying data-driven technologies to asthma self-management. So my supervisors are Akmar, Hilary, and Andrew. And today I'm going to talk a little bit first about the background of asthma and self-management, and then I'll talk about one of my projects, which is using publicly available data sets, and then the other project which I have, which is to conduct this AIM 00 study, which is an observational study, and some of the preliminary results of that. So asthma, if you don't know, is a chronic disease which affects over 300 million people around the world, all around Europe, and particularly in the UK, where we are a hotspot for asthma in Europe. And about every 1 in 10 seconds, someone actually experiences asthma attack, which can be life-threatening or put them into hospital. So asthma is a respiratory disease which affects your airways. And essentially, we've got 3 pictures here. We've got the normal airway, which is quite hollow, and you can breathe very well. And then we've got the asthmatic airway, which is more constricted. And when you have an asthma attack, which might happen once a year, maybe once every 3 years, maybe once every 10 years, depending on who you are. But that then constricts and then becomes very hard to breathe. You might get wheezing, you might get shortness of breath, coughing, and all the other symptoms like that. And essentially, it makes it really hard to breathe, and it can be life-threatening. So right now, there is no cure for asthma. So unfortunately, it is not something that you can cure by a couple of pills. So we have to manage this across a lifetime of people having the asthma themselves. And at the center of this is self-management. And self-management, the first part of self-management is knowing what to do at what time. So when you're feeling relatively okay, this might be a controlled condition or a controlled condition of your asthma, and that the correct action at that point is to continue taking your long-acting preventer inhaler. So that will make sure that you keep the symptoms down and keep your asthma under control. And when your symptoms get worse, then you might need to take your relief inhaler, which will then help expand your airways and then make you be able to breathe again. So knowing when to do the action of taking your relief inhaler or taking a break is fundamental to self-management. However, your symptoms are what we call a subjective measurement. So if you want for example, an actual number to quantify your asthma condition, you might need to use the gold standard. What we have right now is the peak flow, which is the measurement of your lung capacity. So it is a device where you blow into it as hard as possible and just measures how much air is in your lung. But if you were to conduct and complete this peak flow measurement every single day, even though when you're well, it'll become very boring and very, very tedious. Because most likely you have the exact same measurement as you did yesterday and the previous minute and the previous hour. So it is a very tedious process to continuously monitor yourself if you're relatively stable. And this is where mHealth might come in. So mHealth refers to mobile health, and these are some of the devices that you might see. So these are all relatively small and can fit in your pocket. And as you go about your everyday life, you can monitor yourself and get information about your own asthma. So for example, you might recognize a smartwatch, which will be able to extract data such as your heart rate, your activity, sleep quality, as you go about your everyday life. Just wearing a smartwatch will provide you this type of level of information that we can maybe, which will have less engagement than filling in a symptom diary every day and taking peak flow measurements. And we've also got the weather, which is very important for asthma because most people are sensitive to changes in weather or high pollen levels, extreme heat, extreme cold. So these are the information that we could extract from the weather reports. And more specifically for asthma, we have a smart peak flow meter and smart inhalers. So the smart inhaler is just a device that you plug into your inhaler, and it measures when and maybe even where you're taking your inhaler. And at the center of all this is the smartphone, which provides a massive amount of computing power. And it's also got the camera and other recording devices that might actually provide further information about you. But monitoring all this information by yourself as a human being every single day can become very, very tedious and also lead to data fatigue, where you just have way too much information to handle by yourself. And this is where machine learning might be able to help. So mHealth provides lots of objective data, and this is where machine learning shines. So machine learning can help you identify patterns and flag up when you might need to look into the data a bit more carefully. So my project is going to be applying machine learning and mHealth to help asthma self-management. So in my literature review, I just popped a few studies here that I thought were shows the variety of research that is going on in the field. So first off, we've got cough monitoring using smartphones. So using audio recordings of the smartphone, the researchers were able to identify between continuous vowel sounds and coughing sounds. So this could be, if we were to have the smartphone on all the time, then essentially we can have a passive monitoring where the smartphone records all these sounds and identifies when you've coughed, and they can just double check that you have indeed had worsening symptoms. And secondly, we've got the sleep quality from smartwatches and home devices. So if you've tried a smartwatch, I'm sure you've looked at your sleep quality, whether you slept 6 hours, 8 hours, any sleep awakening, how much percentage REM sleep. So these are all aspects that could indicate better sleep. And specifically for asthma, sleep awakening symptoms is one of the most indicative of worsening asthma condition. So being able to identify a change in sleep quality and worsening sleep, this could be very important to determine your asthma condition. And the devices that I showed earlier were the smart inhalers, which measured when and where you're taking your inhalers. But researchers have used the audio recording to determine your inhaler technique. So using an inhaler is actually surprisingly difficult, and getting the correct technique every time can be challenging. So for example, the correct technique is to have a long, slow breath with like that. That's like a long breath of inhaler. And that would slowly let the steroids go into your lungs. So if you have a short, quick breath, which is surprisingly what most people actually do, then that means the medication will actually stick to the back of the throat and not be used properly. So even though we are prescribing patients with inhalers, if they're not using it properly, then it's not doing the right thing. So measuring and monitoring the inhaler technique can be helpful for improving asthma control and also helping educate patients about the asthma. So in my project, I'm building the asthma attack management online system. And at the center of this is a multi-scale predictor. So it's going to be multi-scale in two ways. So first off, it's going to be multi-scale in the sense that there is passive monitoring and active monitoring. So passive monitoring refers to monitoring which requires minimal engagement from patients, for example, wearing a smartwatch or popping a sensor underneath your bed. So monitoring, for example, your activity, heart rate, and maybe even the weather, we hope to be able to identify when you might need to have closer active monitoring. For example, maybe in the next month or next week, we think you're going to have an asthma attack. So then you can complete the more traditional methods of monitoring, such as filling in symptom diaries and taking P-flow measurements to give us more information and the model to determine whether it's a false alarm or whether it is going to be an attack. And we want to be able to identify an attack within an actionable amount of time. So for example, like 4 to 3 days that you're going to have an attack, and then you will perhaps increase your medication, and then you'll return to a stable state where you can continue your passive monitoring. And the second way in which the model is going to be a multi-scale is the fact that we're going to have this subgroup level model and a patient level model. So in machine learning terms, what asthma is a very imbalanced class problem, in the sense that we almost have 90% of the time where people are stable and about 10% of the time where people are not stable. So the amount of data that we have for the two classes is very imbalanced. And for a single patient, if we were to build a model for a single patient, then we might only have one data point per year, or maybe even less. So by combining the data from patients who are similar, then we might be able to increase the amount of data we have for our model, and therefore increase the confidence that we have in our prediction. So then these models can then feed into the patient who has little data, and the patient feeds data back into the subgroup level model to improve that model overall giving better predictions. And so the first part of my PhD was to use some publicly available data. And that publicly available data is the Asthma Mobile Health Study, which is the largest health study for asthma. And it collected about 6,000 patients of data over 21 months. And the way the study was conducted was that they built an app for the iPhone, they put it on the App Store, and anyone in the US could just download that. And if they had asthma, then they could continue to fill in the questionnaires, like the daily questionnaires about their symptoms, any triggers that they've encountered, and how they're feeling that day. And they can complete weekly questionnaires, which involve asking about the hospitalization, any increase in medication, and so forth. And they were also able to provide the location at a state level, and we can use this information to grab, for example, the air quality in that state or the weather in that state. And in the baseline questionnaire, they also answered questions about the asthma history and generally the demographics and so forth. And in this first project, I focused on this particular aspect of the multi-scale predictor. So using this closer active monitoring, which refers to the questionnaires, the daily questionnaires, I want to predict an attack. So using the daily and weekly questionnaires, in the daily questionnaires contains the information about the inputs, and the weekly questionnaires contains information about whether the patient had essentially an asthma attack or not. So what I did was look at groups of daily questionnaires, and the reason why I looked at particular groups and not individually was that we can then assess the trend of the patient's condition, and also because patients don't answer the questions regularly, and you can imagine over 21 months to answer a questionnaire every single day can be difficult. And so some people might have answered it on a Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, whereas other people answered on a Wednesday and a Sunday. So different patients answered the questionnaires sporadically. And so we have some sparsity in our data, and by grouping it and summarizing it over different periods, then we have like for like, and then we can put it into our machine learning models. So for each of these groups of periods, each of these groups of daily questionnaires, we put a linear regression on it, and we've extracted the mean, the gradient, and the goodness of fit. And this was what was fed into a decision tree, our logistic regression model, naive Bayes, and SVM. And we did a classification problem of two classes. And the results were pretty good. So we got AUC of 0.87 with the logistic regression and naive Bayes. So we were reasonably confident in being able to identify an upcoming asthma attack in the next week and the next 2 weeks. And this was only using 6 features as listed in the table. And you can read more about this particular study in the EMBC conference paper that I had. So the next step was using the Asthma Mobile Health Study was to tackle this particular part of the multi-scale prediction. So how do we get subgroups into patient groups? So first, we looked at using clustering to derive data-driven clusters for patient subgroups. And so working with my clinical supervisors, we identified a few markers and risk factors of asthma attacks. and then we used k-means to form the clusters of patients, and then we ranked accordingly the risk factors of each of those clusters using lasso. And so we identified 4 patient clusters, one ranging from patients who had no asthma attacks to 4, which had patients which had lots of asthma attacks. And we can see that the importance of the features, which is determined by the length of each bar, we can see that activity limitation, night symptoms, and female sex are most prominent. And these are clinically significant risk factors of asthma attacks. So it at least aligns the data-driven clusters that we derived were at least aligns with the clinical understanding. And a result of this analysis, we also found that maybe missed work and missed school could be giving additional information to stratify patients to give information about the level of asthma attacks. For example, some people had more missed work, but then less hospitalization. So it could give further segmentation that way. So the analysis I've done so far was done on questionnaire data, which requires a lot of active engagement from the participants. And so my next study was to carry out this AMOS 00 study, which is an observational study to inform better asthma attack predictions using smart devices. So using more objective data, we try to improve our asthma attack prediction models. And by asking patients to use these smart devices for a long amount of time, we will also explore the acceptability of using devices like this to manage asthma. So the study is split into 2 phases. So we have 1 month of daily questionnaire monitoring, which we ask the patients to fill in a daily questionnaire about their symptoms and the asthma condition. And this way we can determine whether a patient is likely to be adherent to a long amount of monitoring and a daily amount of monitoring. And the patients who were able to monitor themselves almost every day, we invited them into the phase 2 of the study, which is 6 months of monitoring with the smart devices and also with the daily questionnaire. And this way we can compare the new type of monitoring with the traditional type of asthma monitoring. And then we gave a questionnaire to ask about the acceptability. So the study had 4 devices, which was the smart p-flow meter, a smart inhaler, a smart watch, and the smartphone. And over 6 months, we had 30 patients to collect these information. So for the peak flow, we used the smart p-flow meter, which is a device that plugs into the phone as shown in the photo. And if you don't have a headphone jack, there is also a Bluetooth adapter. And this way we can measure the patient's lung capacity every day, in the night and in the evening. This will give an idea of the asthma condition, and also corresponds to the more traditional level of asthma management. And next we have monitoring of the relief medication. So this is the relief inhaler that you use when you're feeling unwell. And we use the Smart Air 1 smart inhaler, which is a device that pops onto the top of your inhaler. And as you use your inhaler, you actually press the button at the same time. So then it records when you have used your inhaler. And next we have the Mi Band 3 smart watch, which is a band that you can wear to monitor your heart rate, your steps, your activity. And we use this information to not only look at your sleep, but also your daily activity. And all these devices go into the smartphone via the Mobi Study app. So Mobi Study app is a open source research platform. And on that same app, we are also able to ask questionnaires daily and weekly about your asthma symptoms and hospitalization and so forth. And of course, we have the environment data. So using the location of each of the patients, we're able to give them localized forecasts of the pollen levels, the air pollution and weather, which which we can also use in our prediction model to give more information regarding or potentially explaining and predicting worsening asthma symptoms. So we recruited patients using mostly social media and sending out letters through the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital. And we were able to get 32 patients in phase 1 and 22 patients in phase 2. And you can see each of the times that we sent out, we prompted patients and the general public. That's when the recruitment went up. And over the course of phase 2, what we have is around 17-ish patients at most going and doing the tasks and giving us more information. So generally the adherence was pretty good, and the patients who were able to begin using the devices were able to continue to use the devices throughout. And so now I'll just give a quick preliminary update on some of the results that I've done, which falls into this part of the study, which is doing passive monitoring to inform active closer monitoring. So in the daily questionnaires, what we have is essentially the Royal College of Physicians 3 questions for asthma control. And these are as follows. So they monitor difficulty in sleeping, whether you've got usual asthma symptoms in the day, and whether asthma has actually interfered with your usual activities. And in this particular analysis, I'll just focus on the first question, which is whether you've had difficulty sleeping because of your asthma. So using the smartwatch, we wanted to extract some features to determine whether you slept well or not. And here is here's a confusion matrix for one patient. So it's pretty good. We've got the AUC of 0.96. And so this means that if we have asked the patient to fill in a questionnaire when we thought that they might have had a worsening sleep, we would have asked them 24 times, and in 19 of those times, they indeed would have had worsening sleep or sleep waking. And if we compare that to what we would have had to ask in a traditional sense, we would have had asked 115 times, and only 20 of those times where they actually had a positive result. So using this method of smartwatch inferring when to ask questionnaires, we could actually reduce the overall engagement from the patients by a massive amount, and we don't lose out on the care that has been provided. So in summary, my PhD has progressed towards hybrid monitoring. So that's hybrid of passive and active monitoring using mHealth and machine learning to help asthma management. And I started off by doing asthma attack predictions, and we managed to predict asthma attacks within 2 weeks using the actively monitored daily questionnaires. And to improve that prediction, we looked at collecting We looked at collecting objective data from smart devices over 14 months, and this has shown to be potentially useful for passive monitoring. Thank you.